Welcome to the Cheating Wife Stories channel. I pulled off my tie, tossing it onto the dresser, and turned to Camille, who was folding laundry on the bed. The weight of the conversation ahead pressed on my chest, but there was no way around it. The company retreat got moved up, I said, keeping my voice steady. I have to leave in the morning. She didn't look up. The steady rhythm of her hands folding a blouse didn't break. Only the tightening of her jaw gave her away. That's this weekend, she said flatly. I know. I wouldn't go if it wasn't important. Now she looked at me, the usual warmth in her brown eyes gone, replaced by something colder, something unreadable. You mean more important than the wedding, she said. I exhaled. Camille, come on. You know this is a huge deal. They don't just promote people to CFO and let them skip out on things like this. She finished folding the last blouse, smoothing out the fabric with slow, deliberate movements. We've known about this wedding for a year, Ethan. I know, and I get it. You're the maid of honor. Audrey's your best friend. But this is my job. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Your job, she repeated. Something about the way she said it made my stomach tighten. I stepped closer, reaching for her, but she sidestepped, gathering the folded clothes into a neat stack. I watched her in silence. If this had been a year ago, she would have sighed, maybe made a sarcastic remark. Then let me pull her into a hug. We would have been fine by morning. But now I wasn't so sure. I'll be back late Sunday, I said. I'll make it up to you. I promise. She let out a short, humorless laugh. How exactly are you going to do that, Ethan? You think some flowers and a dinner reservation fix this? It's not like I have a choice. Her eyes snapped to mine. You always have a choice. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. This isn't about choosing between you and my job. This is about being the kind of man who keeps his word. I signed a contract, Camille. I have responsibilities. I can't just bail because it's inconvenient. She nodded, as if I had confirmed something she already suspected. Then she picked up the pile of laundry and walked past me without another word. I stood there, feeling the air shift in the empty room. That night, she didn't speak to me. When I came to bed, the door was locked. The silence carried into the morning. Camille moved through the house like a ghost. Her presence felt but unreachable. I poured a cup of coffee, watching her from the kitchen as she sat at the dining table, scrolling through her phone. Her posture was rigid, her movements clipped. She hadn't looked at me once. I set my mug down. Camille. Nothing. I tried again. I know this wedding means a lot to you. Her fingers tightened around her phone. You don't know anything. I sighed. That's not fair. She finally glanced up, her eyes sharp. Fair. Ethan, I stood by Audrey through everything. When her ex walked out on her during chemo, I sat with her in the hospital for every appointment. When she lost her hair, I shaved my head too. When she thought she'd never love again, I was the one who kept telling her she would. And now, after everything she's been through, I'm supposed to show up alone. Without my husband. I rubbed a hand over my jaw. I hadn't thought of it that way. I knew Audrey's story. Everyone in our circle did. Her ex-husband, Matt, had been the kind of man who vowed to be there for better or worse, then ran the second worst showed up. Audrey had survived him, but barely. And now she had Brandon. A good man. A man who adored her. This wedding wasn't just a celebration. It was a battle won. Camille pushed back her chair abruptly, standing. She asked me to be her maid of honor because she trusts me, because she knows I'll always be there. Her voice wavered. Can you say the same? The words hit like a blow to the gut. That's not fair, I said again, softer this time. She shook her head. You keep saying that like it changes anything. I watched her walk away, the quiet sound of her footsteps disappearing down the hall. A familiar unease settled in my chest. This wasn't just about the wedding. This was something deeper, a fracture that had been forming long before this conversation. I just hadn't seen it, Or maybe I had and chose to ignore it. I finished my coffee in silence, staring at the empty chair across from me. The airport was already packed when I arrived, the low hum of early morning travelers filling the terminal. I went through security on autopilot, still replaying the conversation with Camille. The locked bedroom door, the look in her eyes, the finality of it. I pulled out my phone and stared at our last messages. Nothing but silence from her. I typed out another text. "Boarding soon. I know you're upset, but I'll call when I land." I hesitated before hitting send, then shoved my phone into my pocket and headed to the gate. The airline had overbooked the flight, people scrambling to switch seats, arguing with attendants. I barely paid attention as I checked in and took a seat near the window, staring at the rain streaking the glass. A voice crackled over the speakers. Flight delay. The CEO's plane was caught in a storm, and the entire retreat was being pushed back. Just like that, the meeting I was about to sacrifice my marriage over no longer existed. I shot to my feet, gripping my bag. Within minutes, I was at the counter, rebooking the next available flight home. I could make it to the wedding. Maybe even fix this. As I waited for my boarding pass, a strange relief settled over me. This was the universe course-correcting, giving me another shot before things spiraled too far. The flight boarded quickly. I slid into my seat, my mind racing. Camille would be surprised. Maybe even happy. At least I hoped she would be. I pulled into the venue's packed parking lot just after 9. The wedding reception was in full swing, lights spilling from the tall windows, laughter and music drifting into the night air. I shut off the engine and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, my heart pounding harder than it should have. I had rehearsed this in my head the entire flight back. Camille's face lighting up when she saw me, the way she'd throw her arms around my neck, the relief in her voice when she told me she was glad I came. But now, sitting outside, a sick feeling crept in. What if I was wrong? I climbed out of the car and headed for the entrance, straightening my jacket. A few guests milled around outside, smoking, laughing, lost in their own conversations. I slipped past them, through the double doors, and into the reception hall. The place was buzzing. Chandeliers hung low, casting everything in a warm glow. People packed the dance floor, dresses swaying, drinks in hand, celebrating like the world outside didn't exist. I searched the room for Camille, scanning the tables, the bar, the clusters of guests. And then I saw her. She sat at a small table near the dance floor, her back to me, leaning in close to someone. A man. His arm rested on the back of her chair, his body angled toward hers, his expression easy, familiar. Adrian Carter. I hadn't thought about him in years. Camille's ex from college, the one she rarely mentioned but never completely erased. He was taller than I remembered, his suit crisp, his smile confident. And Camille, she was laughing, touching his forearm lightly, the way she used to touch mine. My stomach twisted. I took a step closer, trying to hear, trying to convince myself this wasn't what it looked like. But then she leaned in even more, tucking her hair behind her ear, smiling at him like he was the only person in the room. Like I had never existed. A slow song started, the couples on the dance floor pulling each other close. Adrian stood, extending his hand. Camille hesitated for only a second before placing hers in his. And then she let him lead her onto the floor. I stood frozen as they moved together, her body close to his, their hands clasped. She tilted her head back and laughed at something he said, a soft, unguarded sound that cut straight through me. I had spent the entire flight thinking of ways to fix things. But now, standing here, watching my wife in the arms of another man, I realized something. Maybe she had already moved on. I should have walked away. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, leave before I made a scene, before I said something I couldn't take back. But my feet stayed planted, my hands curling into fists at my sides. I watched them move together, too close, her body melting into his like it belonged there. She knew how to dance. Slow, controlled, deliberate movements. She wasn't tipsy, wasn't stumbling, wasn't unaware of where she was or who she was with. And then, right there under the soft glow of the chandeliers, she lifted her face to his. The kiss wasn't long. It wasn't desperate. It was worse. It was slow, lingering, familiar, like slipping into something old and worn, something comfortable. I felt something inside me snap. She had to know I was watching. Maybe not at first, but now. The way her lips moved against his, the way his hand rested low on her back. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. A hot, bitter taste rose in my throat as I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady when I lifted the camera, zoomed in, and pressed the shutter. Once, twice, a slow, damning confirmation of what was unfolding right in front of me. I dropped my phone back into my pocket and turned away, my pulse hammering in my ears. The air outside was cooler, a sharp contrast to the heat burning beneath my skin. I reached my car, gripping the door handle so hard my knuckles went white. I could have confronted her, caused a scene, humiliated them both. But what would that do? Instead, I pulled out my phone and typed out a message. Guess what? My meeting got pushed, and I'm back early. Looks like you're in good hands tonight. I'll head home. Don't bother coming back. I hit send, then stood there, waiting. It didn't take long. Through the windows of the reception hall, I saw her reach for her phone, saw the way her expression shifted as she read my message. Her spine straightened, her face drained of color. I watched her fumble with the screen, saw her eyes dart toward the doors. Then she bolted. I got into my car and drove away. I didn't wait to hear her excuses. The road stretched ahead, dark and empty, but I barely saw it. My mind replayed the image over and over. Camille leaning into Adrian, her body pressing against his like it was the most natural thing in the world. The way she kissed him. Not hesitant, not accidental. Deliberate. I clenched the steering wheel, my grip so tight my knuckles ached. My phone sat on the passenger seat, face down, vibrating every few seconds. Calls, messages, all from her. I didn't need to read them to know what they said. Ethan, please, let me explain. It's not what you think. I wasn't going to. Come back. Please, just talk to me. The same predictable cycle. Denial, excuses, begging. I let it ring. An hour into the drive, I finally pulled into a gas station. The fluorescent lights buzzed, the air thick with the smell of diesel and burnt coffee. I stepped out, the cool night air hitting me like a slap. I leaned against the car and inhaled deep, trying to steady myself, but it didn't work. My chest was tight, my pulse still hammering. For years, I had been the one she counted on, the one who showed up, the one who made sacrifices, worked late, planned for a future that clearly only I believed in. And Camille, she had been my anchor, the person I thought would always be there, even when things got hard. I had been wrong. A new vibration from my phone. This time, a message from my best friend, Luke. Call me. I hesitated, then picked up, pressing the phone to my ear. Hey, where are you? His voice was sharp, alert. Camille's losing it. She called me, freaking out. I let out a short laugh. Yeah, I bet she is. She said you left, that you won't answer her calls. She's right. A pause. Ethan, what happened? I stared out at the empty road, feeling the words press against my teeth. I could have held them back, pretended I wasn't coming undone. But what was the point? I saw her with him. My voice was steady, but it felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else. Dancing, laughing, kissing. Luke swore under his breath. She didn't even hesitate. I continued, didn't even look guilty. Silence stretched between us. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. What are you gonna do? I already knew. I'm done. Another pause. Then, you sure? I exhaled. Yeah. And I was. I climbed back into the car and put my phone on silent. Let her call. Let her text. Let her drown in the same silence she had given me. I wasn't coming back. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun was creeping up over the horizon, bathing the house in soft light. It felt different now, less like home, more like a place I had once belonged, but no longer did. I sat in the car for a moment, gripping the wheel, letting the weight of it all settle over me. I had left this house expecting to come back to a wife who would miss me, who would be upset but ultimately understand. Instead, I had come back to something I could never unsee. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Camille again. I didn't bother to look at the message. I stepped out of the car and walked up the driveway, unlocking the front door and stepping inside. The silence swallowed me whole. Everything was exactly as I had left it. My suitcase still sitting by the entryway. The faint scent of Camille's perfume lingering in the air. But something had shifted. I wasn't staying. I walked into the bedroom, grabbed a duffel bag, and started packing. Essentials first: clothes, toiletries, important documents. My hands moved on autopilot, my mind blank, like I was watching someone else go through the motions of dismantling a life. Halfway through, I heard tires screech outside. Then footsteps, hurried, frantic. The front door flew open. Ethan. Her voice cracked as she called my name, footsteps pounding down the hall. I didn't stop packing. She appeared in the doorway, breathless, hair messy, still in her dress from the night before. Her makeup had smudged, mascara streaked beneath her eyes. She looked like someone who had spent the entire night crying. She probably had. "Ethan, please." Her voice wavered. "Just talk to me." I zipped the bag shut. "We don't have anything to talk about." She took a step inside. "That's not true. Please, just let me explain." I turned to face her, my voice flat. "Explain what, Camille?" "That you were upset. That you had a few drinks. That it didn't mean anything." Her lip trembled. I shook my head. "I saw you, Camille. I saw everything." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. "Do you know what the worst part is?" I said. "I was coming back to fix things. I was coming back for you. And you." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "You had already moved on." Her face crumpled. "I haven't moved on. I don't want him. I want you." I exhaled slowly, my anger sharpening into something colder, something final. "You don't get to want me now." She reached for my hand, but I stepped back. "Ethan, don't do this." I met her eyes, steady, calm. "I already have." And with that, I picked up my bag and walked past her. She sobbed my name as I left, but I didn't turn back. Some things weren't worth saving. The company condo was smaller than the house, a sterile space meant for temporary stays. White walls, gray furniture, a view of the city skyline that felt more distant than impressive. It was quiet. Too quiet. I dropped my duffel bag on the couch and stood there, hands on my hips, staring at the emptiness. No Camille. No tension in the air. No locked doors. Just me. I should have felt relieved. Maybe part of me did. But another part, one I wasn't ready to face yet, felt hollow. I pulled out my phone. A dozen missed calls from Camille, 100 unread messages. I scrolled past them, opening a new chat instead. "Luke, moved into the condo. I'll be in the office tomorrow." Seconds later, my phone buzzed. "Luke, you good?" "Me, yeah." A lie, but what else was there to say? I tossed my phone onto the coffee table, rubbed a hand over my face, and exhaled. There was no roadmap for this. No step-by-step guide on how to unmake a life you'd spend years building. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I worked. The next morning, I showed up at the office before anyone else, buried myself in spreadsheets and projections, made calls, signed off on reports. When people asked how the retreat went, I said it was postponed, changed the subject before they could dig deeper. I stayed late, went to the gym, ran until my legs burned. Anything to keep my mind from drifting back to her. But the memories crept in anyway. The smell of her perfume, the sound of her laugh, the way she used to rest her head on my shoulder at the end of the day. I clenched my jaw and pushed harder, faster. 2 weeks passed, then 3, and slowly the weight started to lift. One morning, as I was leaving the gym, my phone vibrated with a new message. Not from Camille. "Sophia, you still owe me a rematch." I stared at the name for a long time before typing back. Me. Name the time and place. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to a smile. It had been a year. A year since I left. A year since I last saw Camille. A year since I started over. The house sold quickly. I never went back after packing my things, just signed the paperwork, let the lawyers handle the rest. Camille stayed in town for a while, or so I heard, but we never ran into each other. Eventually, she moved, somewhere out west, according to Luke. I never asked where. Now, standing outside a cafe in a different city, watching Sophia laugh at something on her phone, I realized how much had changed. How much I had changed. "Come on, Ethan, we're gonna be late," she called over her shoulder, already halfway across the street. I smirked and followed. The past had its place, but I wasn't living in it anymore. Some endings weren't tragedies. Some were just the beginning of something new. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.